Oh, halfway through. Martin. Martin. Maria said that she can fill in anywhere. Maria said that she can fill in.
Good morning and welcome to day 3. Welcome back to the Central Hotel Panama in Casco Viejo, Panama. And we are on day 3 of Good Cop, Conference of the People. The other cop, Conference of the Parties, that's the bad cop. And it's day 3. A lot has happened so far. I want to introduce who we're speaking with this morning. Every morning for the past few mornings is Lindsay Stroud, who is our Senior Fellow on Harm Reduction. Martin Cullup, who is our International Fellow, and want to talk a little bit about what happened yesterday, day 2, in the COP that's a few kilometers away, and also a preview of day 3 for Martin. And Lindsay, I want you to talk about their focus, the World Health Organization's focus on nicotine, and our friend Michael Bloomberg. I think there's a lot to talk about with Michael Bloomberg, but Martin, let's get right into this about day 2, and let's talk about what happened yesterday. And I want you to talk about St. Kitts and Nevis. I know this is not a country that people are really familiar with, but I think what they did yesterday hopefully is a sign of things to come, and maybe they can gain some momentum with what happened yesterday.
Yeah, it seems that rumours seem to be abound everywhere that St. Kitts and Nevis has proposed a draft decision on putting together a working group to look at Article 1D. Now, Article 1D is in the preamble of the treaty, and it talks about harm reduction as one of the pillars of tobacco control efforts. So they were apparently backed by Guatemala, that's the rumour anyway. You wouldn't know that because it's not in the journal. The journal has some brief rundown of what happens, and there's no mention of it at all. But there is a clue, which I'll get to later, that it could well have happened. As far as other things, firstly, we've had the first award of this COP10 process, and it was given to Brunei. It was the Global Tobacco Index Integrity Award. Now, what that is, the Global Tobacco Index, I mean, as well as obsessing about industry interference and having Article 5.3, which they misapply all the time, to try and silence debate and close down any objections to what they're doing. They also have a league table of countries who do the Article 5.3 and the enforcement better than others. And so Brunei came top of this league table, and they've given an award for being basically the biggest smearers and the biggest bullies in the world. So congratulations to Brunei for that. It was pointed out, though, in a vaping advocates chat group by Samrat Chowdhury from India. He said, well, that's great for Brunei. He said, but their smoking rate has been 16% constantly since 2000. So they may well be good at suppressing debate, but they're not that good at actually reducing their smoking prevalence in their country. Yeah, the other thing was, I must apologise to some consumers because they were saying, oh, they're live streaming on day 2. And I said, no, they're not. It must be a rerun of yesterday because they were doing the country statements. No, they were actually live streaming, but they were country statements that they had adjourned since the day before. So there must have been a lot of countries who wanted to speak, and they didn't have time on day 1. Some notes from that. UK delegation, I'm from the United Kingdom. I think what our delegation spoke about was pretty awful. I think it was cowardly. One of the biggest points of our public health policy at the moment is the Stop to Swap campaign, or Swap to Stop campaign, which is where they're giving out, the UK government's giving out 1 million vapes to smokers to help them switch and go smoke-free. And our delegation was too cowardly to even mention that in the room.
So how does that happen? How do you have that disconnect between the Swap to Stop and then you have the delegation coming down here? Because when we were talking earlier this week and last week, you thought that there might be a glimmer of hope from the UK delegation. So how do you reconcile the two when you have Public Health England, who's done these reports and done, looked at the science of this, but now you have the delegation? How do you square that circle?
I don't know. I mean, maybe they've tailored it to the audience they've got. They've got an audience that doesn't like tobacco harm reduction. They don't want to rock the boat. But that's exactly what they should be doing. They should be saying, look at what we do in the UK. They didn't mention harm reduction. They didn't mention the Swap to Stop campaign. And all they spoke about was basically youth vaping, how they're doing this generational smoke-free policy. And they even spoke at the end about the risks of nicotine to youth. So it kind of was written with the audience in mind, and it was very disappointing. Like I said, I think it's cowardly that they didn't even mention the Swap to Stop campaign, which is a central part of our public health policy in the UK.
And before you get on too much, I want to talk about St. Kitts and Nevis and Guatemala again, because there seems to be a lack of transparency where you have these countries saying these good things, but the WHO isn't reporting, like they're not including it, right, in their, what'd you say, in their bulletin?
Well, yeah, but we can only say it is a rumour that's come from many different places, so it may well have happened, but at the moment we can't say it's definitely happened.
Well, and I would encourage people to try to confirm what is happening and give credit to these countries that are pushing back on the World Health Organization, because what I'm concerned about is that they're going to be punished. Is that if they're not going along with the company line of the World Health Organization, they're going to be punished for this. So we have to give them support wherever we can. And
Well, they will be punished. The webinar they did 2 weeks ago, they had the Filipino representative from like 2 years ago, and they're like, oh, this anti-harm reduction message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But yeah, but the St. Kitts statement did mention harm reduction. It said it shouldn't ignore harm reduction, so they may have gone one step further and actually proposed a draft decision on Article 1D. In contrast to the UK delegation, the New Zealand delegation did mention harm reduction, which I think was positive. That just shows how even more cowardly the UK delegation was. And I don't know if that's because we've had a change in public health minister recently. I don't know. And of the others, Armenia had a good statement to make, and also El Salvador was quite positive. But now we've had two bulletins come out from the GTAC, which I mentioned yesterday. That's the fan club of the FCTC.
Did they have a fan club?
Yeah, it's kind of the fan club. They're a group of NGOs who basically just support the FCTC. And what I always find astonishing is that they give these awards out which either encourage countries or they criticise countries. Now, considering the countries, the parties are the boss in this thing, and the NGOs are just observers, the fact that they sort of chastise sovereign governments in these bulletins for not towing the FCTC line and wanting to have a discussion. I don't know why the countries put up with it, to be honest. But anyway, the first award, Oman got an Orchid Award, which is an award, and this was for saying that many of the parties were wanting to have discussions. And they said, you're wasting our time. Can you stop discussing things and just get on with the programme? So they got an award for that. The Ashtray Awards, Dirty Ashtray Awards, there's two of them. One was for the Afro region for I can't remember what it was for now, I haven't written it down. No, that's right. The Ashtray Award on the first day was for anyone opposed Article 18 on the agenda. Now, Article 18 is the one that proposes banning cigarette filters. So anyone who opposed that, because it was an excellent proposal, anyone opposed that got a Dirty Ashtray Award. I mean, this is what we're talking about with these fan clubs. You're getting in the way of what the FCT wants to do.
Martin,
how dare you?
Maybe it's time we give an award to the countries that are doing good things for tobacco harm reduction. Let's throw it over to Lindsay now. And I've got one more. I've got
one more thing here. The other award for the Dirty Ashtray was Guatemala, who reportedly supported St. Kitts and they got their award for trying to reopen agenda items that have been closed and time wasting.
Fantastic. So on day one, we saw this discussion about nicotine and expanding the FCTC's treaty. Talk about how this is 100% misguided. This is expanding their mission, but also, we have a panel, I believe, starting at 11 on Bloomberg, and Bloomberg's presence in this city is massive. I mean, they have descended upon Panama City like no one else before. So talk a little bit about both the nicotine but also Bloomberg.
Yeah, this demonization of nicotine is just really alarming. I know I've been noticing it for the past several years, this ignorance surrounding, what causes the harm from smoking, that nicotine is as harmful or just as harmful as smoking a cigarette, and just missing this whole message. I mean, we had it, when since 1976 when Michael Russell said people smoke for the nicotine, but they die from the tar, and we are so far beyond that now where you have doctors, medical professionals who are under the impression that nicotine causes cancer, and it's increasing despite all of these WHO endorsed public health bureaucrats that are, supposed to be leading the charge in reducing smoking rates, and it's just really alarming. I know it comes from the States. I mean, they started coming from the States with this confusion, like really early, but it's being massively, pushed out, across the world, especially when you're looking at like the UK banning disposables. 2 weeks before they come and do a terrible opening statement, and not endorsing their own harm reduction programs. And it's just really unfortunate that despite all the science, despite all, everyone around the world having access to information, that there's so much misinformation about what actually is causing the harm related to combustible cigarettes. And again, it's just coming down here, I'm just noticing that the WHO's FCTC, their whole mission on reducing the tobacco smoke burden has been completely just thrown out the window. They don't care about the 1.3 billion adults who are still smoking, and they really don't want them to have any tools to help them quit smoking. So it's kind of alarming. It's really sad. But we'll keep fighting it. I mean, as Martin said yesterday, that's really the only thing that you can keep doing is just moving forward and knowing that, we're on the better side of this movement when we do have the truth. Speaking of the Truth Initiative is here, and Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids has over 30 employees that were listed on the provisional list of delegates. And again, why are there so many people about kids? I mean, youth smoking is at historic lows. I mean, and it is the introduction of novel products. They are more likely to use those products than they are to smoke cigarettes, and this is fantastic because it is the cigarettes that cause the most harm. You are going to have a generation that probably will never smoke a cigarette because they have other products available to them and they are less harmful. I'm not endorsing these kids using these products, but assuming that this zero sum, that we have to have 0 kids using this product is just insane. And also, again, harms the adults out there, the 1.3 billion adults who are still smoking despite having all of these novel products, despite having all this information. So it's kind of alarming. But yeah, we've been writing about Bloomberg for a while, and it's amazing. In our conference, we've got, almost 24 experts. They represent 14 different countries, and they all know Michael Bloomberg, and some of them are even impacted by the policies, that he's spread around the world. And that's just, again, alarming, and I'm so sorry for that guy from New York.
Well, and when you say that, Bloomberg has all these people inside of the meeting, we are not.
No.
I mean, that's why we're doing this here at a hotel a few kilometers away, is that our voices should be heard in the World Health Organization, but they have closed us out to this.
Yes.
And, getting back to the nicotine issue, I find this fascinating because decades ago, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, they approved nicotine gum. They approved nicotine patches. So the FDA has said that nicotine is not the problem.
In their website, they say it. It's buried. They're not very public about talking about nicotine. Yes, but they have approved nicotine replacement therapy, and that's endorsed. It's also subsidized by the government as well to help people quit smoking.
And Bloomberg has his own money. He can spend his own money. The problem is that he is spending it to raise our taxes. He's spending money to take away consumer choice. Therein lies a problem with what Michael Bloomberg is doing, and he's not helping health. I mean, that's the crazy part of this, is that he thinks he's this big philanthropist and that he's helping kids, he's helping adults. He's not. By limiting these products, he's not helping anyone but himself and his own ego.
Can I add something on this, on the Bloomberg thing? You mentioned, our voice isn't being heard, but so there were some voices heard yesterday, a group called Global Youth Voices. which are blatantly funded by Michael Bloomberg. They're funded by, I think, the GTCC.
Sounds like a choir, Global Youth
Yeah,
Voices.
Global Youth Voices. And they've been protesting outside the building, basically saying, WHO, we're here to protest, to make sure that you carry on doing what you're doing anyway. I mean, that's the protest that we're doing.
Why are they outside our building?
And they were welcomed by the FCTC Secretariat, who said it's crucial that young people are heard in tobacco control discussions. Yet they don't think it's crucial that people who have experienced these products, and consumers who have stories to tell, they don't obviously think that it's crucial that our voice is heard.
You know, what's interesting, you talk about kids and the young voices. What about the old voices, people that have been smoking for decades? I mean, those are the voices that they need to hear from, because these are the people that need these products now. If you're 50, 60, or 70, and you're trying to kick the habit of combustible cigarettes, these are the voices that need to be heard.
Well,
those are the ones that...
in the United States, at least looking at the 50-state analysis data, like 65 plus, you're seeing an increase in the percentage of adults 65 years or older that are smoking. I'm curious about what it is. I'm like, what, is it COVID? Again, this is misinformation too about when you look at what happened with COVID. You had this, there was some reason when everybody was getting COVID that people who smoke were really heavily underrepresented for a respiratory disease. And instead of actually examining why this was, it was the automatic just demonization of it. Oh God, it's tobacco. How dare it be something? We have to stop it. I mean, when they blocked the vaccine because the tobacco company had an interest in that or a stake in it. It was just like ridiculous, but not looking at what is going on. It's just alarming. And no, they're not listening to the consumers. They're not listening to the science, and they're using it to shape the really misguided policies.
Well, I'm really interested for the 11 o'clock panel. The Bloomberg
Anti-harm reductions,
Yes.
groups' influence on
Yes.
global health policies. Yes, and for people that just automatically assume if they're going after nicotine and they're going after the youth, it doesn't matter what the name is, it's probably Bloomberg funded and or sponsored, or a Bloomberg front group, since they're going to call me a harm reduction front
And
group.
Bloomberg has front groups, not only nonprofits, but the media. I mean, they pay for a lot of
He pays for the
press.
CDC Foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a lot of grants too. So even our public health, that's supposed to be unbiased, is influenced by him, and you can see it definitely in some of the stuff that we've done.
So day 3, Martin. It's day 3. What do we expect from the World Health Organization? I know they've shut things down, and we're not going to. But what do you've been to these before? You know how these play out during the course of a week. What is today supposed to be?
Well, the journal came out quite late this morning, but it did come out, and it tells you what they're going to be discussing. And it's quite a big day, actually. I mean, in American politics, you have, Super Sunday, when there's lots of states.
Super Tuesday.
Super Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's a bit like that. I mean, they're going through the whole agenda, basically. They're going to be talking about agenda item 6.1, which is Articles 9 and 10. That's contents of products and what have you. They want to install an expert group instead of a working group, which has been suspended. The expert group is appointed by the FCTC convention, but a working group is one that all parties can join. So you can see the threat there is they're going to appoint some experts of their own rather than just let anyone have the discussion. So that's what they're talking about. They're talking about novel and emerging products. Again, that's the science. That's a throw over from yesterday, so they're going to still be talking about that. They're talking about item 6.2 on the agenda, which is tobacco advertising, promotion and sponsorship. So what they want to do here is they're really fed up with TikTok people talking about vapes and Zyn and things like this. So they're really upset, and basically they want to go to these social media people and tell them to close these people down. We don't want to hear them. And they're also laughably talking about putting warnings on entertainment media like films and TV if they have smoking depictions in them, which is one thing they want to do. 6.4 is Article 2.1. This is going beyond the treaty. They want to encourage countries to say, look, you don't have to just stick to what we propose. You can make your own proposals. There's no ceiling to how much of bullying and of smokers and vapors you want to do. You can do as much as you like. So that's on the agenda for the first time. And 6.5, liability. This is about trying to make the tobacco industry accountable for harm. That is normally voted down by Cuba every time it's brought up. So I expect that might happen again, because Cuba has obviously a bit of an interest.
Right.
And lastly is supplementary. It wasn't on the agenda, but it got adopted. And this is the Brazilian proposal to ban cigarette filters. It's under the environmental stuff, and they want to talk about environment and also plastics, which obviously could then lead into proposals to control vaping products.
Two things jump out at me is the social media restrictions. I mean, that's a free speech issue. I mean, for the World Health Organization to take such a draconian action.
Surveys where they say, this is terrible. There has been 300, I'm just making a number up, 330,000 incidents of people talking about positive terms about snus or, vaping or what have you. And young people might see this. So therefore, it has to be closed down because it will influence the young.
And the Brazil issue is fascinating because we know that they've been very vocal here at COP10. So I'll be curious to see what happens with the Brazil initiative and how the WHO and the other countries and the other delegates react.
They've already had an achievement because they proposed this to be added to the agenda, and they've managed to get it onto the agenda. So, and like I said, there was a Dirty Ashtray Award for parties that opposed that. So they weren't allowed to say, I don't think it should be on the agenda, because if you did, you got a Dirty Ashtray Award.
All right. Well, it's been an amazing conference so far, Lindsay. These are people that you've met, you've talked to before. I've only met a lot of these folks on social media. It's great to meet them in person and see the energy, but hear the stories. I mean, we have people from around the world. What are your observations on Good Cop the first few days?
I mean, I think it's great. Like I said, it was last night. It was really alarming about how much we all could talk about Bloomberg and how we've all been impacted by him, and that little small guy's got so much influence over the world. It's kind of alarming, and also with the different countries, seeing the same struggle. I mean, some countries got way worse policies, some got better policies, and they're constantly evolving, is what we're seeing, especially with everything that's happening. So. And yeah, I have known some of these people for a while. When I realized, I started writing about this stuff in 2016, I was like, oh my God, that's 8 years ago. It's almost a decade doing this. And I love it. I wouldn't change anything about it. And the conference is really perfect. The conference of the people, putting the people together, the consumers, the science, and all the policy that's shaping adult access to safer alternatives to cigarettes.
Well, you mentioned New Zealand, and obviously they've made some strides in the right direction when it comes to this. And that's one of the things I want out of this conference, out of Good Cop, is that we have a connection with each other and we learn from each other. Listen, there's a lot of bad things happening in the world when it comes to tobacco harm reduction, but I want us to figure out the good things that are happening and how we can replicate that in our countries. And obviously share information, because there's a lot of science out there, and every day there's more science showing this. And I want to make sure that we share our stories and our experiences, because we are not funded as well as the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
They have an almost, bottomless pit of money that they can draw
They can
from.
always go to Daddy Bloomberg if they need anything.
Daddy Bloomberg to go to. And it's important that, we force ourselves into the conversation, because the World Health Organization isn't going to allow us. But I think so far what we've accomplished this week, I've seen a lot of media reports mentioning our conference, mentioning the people here, interviewing the individuals. There. We're halfway through the
there,
conference,
yes.
And just hope we can continue this momentum. Anything to add?
No, I think that's covered it. I just want to say that, again, I keep saying it, very proud of the lineup we've got here. Anyone watching, it might have seemed like there was just a few people here, but it was a bit like that because we have competition from another conference down the road for Latin Americans.
And we like competition.
Yeah, we like
embrace competition.
Yeah. But as from now, they're all back. That conference is finished, and it's full on for here. We're all guns blazing in Good Cop, and we're looking forward to.
So what do we have coming up at 10 o'clock? What's the?
There's
Low middle income countries.
Yeah, low and middle income countries. Mark Oates is going to be moderating that with Dr. Rohan from India, Thomas O'Gorman from Mexico, Kurt Yo from South Africa, and Jeffrey Samora from Costa Rica, just over the border from Panama. So.
Well, fantastic. Let's take about a 5 or 6 minute break, and we'll be back with our first panel for the day. Thank you.
I don't know where to get hold of it.
Oh, yeah. We have 267 million, which
Right.
is more than every other country's population in the world.
Everybody? Just that.
So we have
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first panel of today on the subject of low and middle income countries and tobacco. We will be discussing how tobacco control groups are failing low and middle income countries and preventing them from accessing tobacco harm reduction. With me to discuss it, we have Thomas O'Gorman, all the way from Mexico, Jeffrey Zamora, Costa Rica, Dr. Rohan Andre de Sequeira, India, and Kurt Yo from South Africa. So what we really want to examine is how the burden of smoking in low and middle income countries is much higher than in the developed world, and how the World Health Organization has long urged draconian policies, including steep excise taxes, bans on novel products, as a way of reducing reducing smoking. So just to kick it off, I want to ask each panel to maybe discuss the situation in their country and how the World Health Organization is affecting them. So, Thomas, if you'd like to step off.
Thank you. Regarding Mexico, the problem with Mexico, as I believe, is that according to the Ensanot surveys, which are surveys made by the government, tobacco consumption regarding smoking has not decreased at least in the last 12 years. If you see the Ensanot survey of 2012, the adult rate or prevalence of smoking was 19.9%, and the last Ensanot from 2022 shows that the prevalence is around 19.5. So considering the growth of population, I believe that there are more people smoking, at least adults, today than 12 years ago. And even though there has been a considerable reduction in youth smoking, I also think that might be pushed by the adoption of e-cigarettes, because in the youth sector of the survey, the adoption of these devices has been higher. Just let me make clear that according to this survey, youth includes people from 18 and 19 years old, which are legally adults, and it's like about half of these. The adults are the ones that are smoking. And the problem is that these low or poor results regarding smoking or quitting smoking have been accompanied by the strong opposition of the Mexican government towards harm reduction products. As you may have heard, our president not only banned the commercialization with a decree in 2021, but now as a reaction to several decisions from the Mexican Supreme Court deeming the ban unconstitutional, he has just on Monday, this February the 5th, he has proposed an amendment into the Mexican Constitution in order to ban the commercialization of vaping products and to prohibit to have the profession or the commercial activity of being a producer or a seller of vaporizers of e-cigarettes. And just to end this section, what also worries me is that this narrative of making the Mexican society believe that e-cigarettes are really bad, as in the same paragraph of the proposed modification or amendment to the Constitution, they are also introducing some kind of ban regarding fentanyl. So they are placing e-cigarettes, which are a harm reduction product, a nicotine product, and you know nicotine is not a dangerous substance. They are placing it near the fentanyl, which is very bad for health when it's not properly used.
Okay. So one thing that I find fascinating observing some of what's going on over at Bad Cop is they're very keen to claim that it's their work that are leading to a reduction in smoking rates. And you mentioned the youth, but they ignore the fact that could it be actually the use of e-cigarettes that's causing that, even in countries like yours where there's a black market?
I tend to think so, because if you if you read the Ensanot surveys, the adult section of the survey, the uptake of e-cigarettes is relatively low, and there is not much change, and therefore people still smoke. And in the youth section, the reductions have been stronger in the last 4 years. I mean, the last 4 years they have like stayed, but from 2012, which was 9%, now it's around 5% or 4.5, 4 point something percent. And that's where the uptake of these products has been noticeable also in the survey. So yes, I do believe that vaping products have been working as a diversion from tobacco uptake, and youth and young people is using these products, which I mean, I do not endorse that a minor uses these products. Let's be clear, it's an adult consumer product, but at least they are helping younger population in order not to start smoking, which is the really bad stuff.
Okay, so Britain has been fairly successful in reducing smoking rates. One of the main reasons I point to is the fact there's a big price differential between traditional cigarettes, which come in about £15 a pack, and you can pick up a disposable vape for £5, and if you go to open systems, even cheaper. So could you just tell me what it's like in Mexico in terms of price?
Well, because in Mexico, the market of e-cigarettes, it's banned. It's quite difficult to compare because they are not taxed. There are some legal products because the companies that produce them have won amparo trials, and therefore they are able to sell them openly in shops and in the regular market, but without any kind of regulation. So they are only paying the IVA, which is the VAT, the value of the tax. Currently, at least in my case, yes, you spend a lot less vaping than smoking, but there have been some propositions in order to place heavy taxes on e-cigarettes. But those bills or those propositions made in the Congress, I mean, they are frozen because as long as it is the ban exists, I mean, they cannot tax, or it would be absurd to tax an irregular or illicit product, right?
Absolutely. And just tell me, is a lot of these draconian measures, do you think this is something the president personally feels about, or do you think there's outside influence?
I think that the president was not properly advised by the sanitary or the health officers. And also, we all know that the prohibitionist idea or the prohibitionist narrative comes mainly, I guess, from the Bloomberg initiative. And I was quite surprised that in the first day of the COP, the Mexican delegate acknowledged, I mean, in his turn to speak, when he took the floor, he said that they were having the support of the Bloomberg initiative. And there have been several indications that foreign NGOs are the ones that are dictating how should Mexico proceed regarding the regulation of e-cigarettes. When the president issued the first decree in 2020 in order to prohibit the imports and exports of these products, it was like around the same time that when the union issued this statement, this document called "When Bans Are Best" for LMICs. So if you ask me, I believe that Mexico is following the suggestions and the policies that had been created by these foreign entities in order to ban vaping and to ban THR products in LMICs.
So you'd say that the Bloomberg lobbyists, do you think they see LMICs and they think that that's the best value we can get, we can really influence policy there?
Yes, and I find it quite perverse because 80% of the smokers in the world live in LMICs. And according to the news a couple of years ago, we saw that one document that should have been prepared by the Congress people in Mexico, because it was like the analysis of a bill, of a project of law that should have been made by the Health Commission of the Mexican Congress, was actually written by a lawyer from Argentina that belongs to Campaign for Tobacco Free Kids. At least that was what the metadata of the file show. So yes, I think these people have found in LMICs the ideal place in order to run their prohibitionist ideas. And it is absurd, because all the anti-tobacco measures, the traditional ones that are enacted in the FCTC, and therefore they have been enacted in the national laws, were designed for rich countries, for countries where law enforcement is effective, where there is money to make them effective, or at least at some extent effective. And as in an article that was made by Mr. Derek Yag, these rules are not working in LMICs, and I guess that the Mexican tobacco consumption results are the proof.
Well, Thomas, thank you very much. I think you've put forward a very strong case that the World Health Organization and some so-called philanthropists are working to keep people smoking and getting ill because of it. Now, Jeffrey, Costa Rica, could you brief me a bit on the situation in your country?
Well, compared, did I have the mic on? Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry. When it comes to Costa Rica, it's tiny compared to Mexico or India, perhaps, that I have here next to me. We only have like 5.2 million people living there. We have 370,000 people that are smoking. And based on the GATS, we have a 1.3% of prevalence when it comes to people using nicotine vaping devices. So we're counting around 70 to 100,000 people vaping. Vaping has been regulated since 2012. There are several bills on discussion at this present time. One is for plain packaging, and the other one it is to include a harm reduction language on the law itself. Right? So obviously there's a huge push from the anti-harm reduction organization trying to have nicotine vaping devices included on the plain packaging bill, right? And there's also, like I said, another push that is to include the harm reduction term within the law. That is because at this present time, nicotine vaping devices is pretty much regulated on the same law that is for any tobacco smoking product.
But overall, it sounds Costa Rica is much more positive than Mexico.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think, why is that? Do you think there's less work being done by the World Health Organization and by Bloomberg Philanthropies to try and prevent you being positive on harm reduction? Or?
Well, they have been, all these years, even though that it was regulated in 2012, we have been, there's a lot of, this organization that is anti-harm reduction have been pushing for different kinds of over-regulation or, pretty much, putting so many obstacles to harm reduction, right? Whatsoever, the fact that it was regulated in 2012 now makes it difficult to ban it, right? So, which is good, obviously. But that's the reason why even though we'll still have a lot of misinformation campaigns coming from different entities and government institutions, right, that we have to work out, and we have been receiving these constant claims of things that does not make any sense at all, like an EVALI case that we know, for example, that is due to THC illicit products laced with vitamin E acetate, and nothing related to the nicotine vaping devices whatsoever. We even have people trying to convince the public that there's some sort of problem with nicotine vaping devices that provokes this kind of diseases. So we're fighting a lot with this constant misinformation and push for over-regulation of the devices whatsoever. The fact that it was regulated back in 2012 give us a point of, at least a point in advance when it comes to public health and the use of these harm reduction products. So you can actually walk into a place and get counseling or get advice on what products you can use. So it's a good thing whatsoever. The constant misinformation about these products have been closing down shops pretty much, right? Because even though the public still believes that it helps to quit smoking, right, or a good portion of it, the constant misinformation is pretty much blocking the growth when it comes to people that smoke that want to transition to a less harmful product if they knew it or have more concise information about it. So on the nicotine vaping devices, which is a 20% tax. So actually escalate the price of these harm reduction products and make it expensive. We can see, we don't have no evidence yet or data, but it is an observational. We can see that the illicit market actually grew because of the tax that it was implemented.
Yeah, so one of the aims, stated aims, whether it be come to fruition or not, is another matter, but is to try and have tax harmonization. That's what some in the World Health Organization want to see. And you've already touched on a little bit the effect that would have. But across the world, could you tell me, at the moment we've got price differentials in the Western world where vaping is much cheaper. If they had tax harmonization, that could change. We could be in the same situation as Costa Rica. So is that something you really think that's important not for the World Health Organization to do?
Well, at this present time, what is important is to have products regulated by taking into account the continuum of risk, right? So products should be more accessible and not as pricey as cigarettes. Obviously, we want to stimulate and encourage people out of the benefit of the monetary benefit that transition into a less harmful product makes sense for them, right? Not only on health-wise, but economically, right? So there's an advantage of that. And that's what we should promote and encourage people to do so. Unfortunately, when it comes to Latin America, we're dealing now on pretty much a lot of countries with trying to get them regulated to start speaking about the taxes that they should pay. At this present time, we only have 4 countries that have regulated nicotine vaping devices that are Costa Rica, Ecuador, Paraguay, and just signed Chile, which haven't made some sort of guideline of how it's going to be regulated, but it's already regulated. So at this present time, and we have more countries that have banned the product that they have actually regulated. So we're kind of on this transitioning thing that perhaps some other countries on Europe were 10 years ago, that discussion, we're having it delayed, right? Because of so much push to ban or denied access to harm reduction alternatives to people.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeffrey. Dr. Rohan, India, it's not just smoking that's the issue, but there's also oral tobacco risk. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I'm really glad I came here because we need a voice, right? So we have 1.4 billion people. The second largest number of tobacco users in the world. Unreported is much bigger, right? I was just checking this morning. I wrote some stats down because I was just looking at it and I was like with googly eyes. And we have 267 million tobacco users. That is more than the population of Indonesia and the population of countries start going. So basically we have whole population of countries in one country which is using tobacco in some form or the other. So if any country practically needs a THR policy, it would be here because that would have the biggest impact, right? Now, this is 2023 data where we had 268 million tobacco users. Adults were about 28% use of total adult population, 28% use tobacco. We have 21% use smokeless tobacco. Now, when you look at smokeless tobacco, there are different categories of smokeless tobacco. You have tobacco which is mixed with calcium hydroxide. It's a component which is used in cement. And you get these tubes, and that's mixed with the tobacco, and then it's put in the mouth, and then they chew on that. You have BDs, you have a paste which is applied in your gums, you have snuff, you have many other illegal, unregulated, unknown products which are mixed with so many chemicals which we have no idea. Nobody's even bothered about getting into the heavy metal toxicity. Nobody's bothered about the lead toxicity, nothing at all. No one knows anything. But those who smoke is about 17 to 18% of the total population. About 8% of youth in the country have exposure to some form of tobacco. 4% smoke, and the other 4% use smokeless tobacco. Now, with this entire scenario on the table, I think what is really needed right now is for the country to make its own decision rather than be bullied by some major organizations. They need to look at their own population, see where people are dying, see 1.2 million deaths every year, which is attributed to smoking. They also say that 30% of people have been exposed to secondhand smoke. There is no data at all available anywhere that people have died because of secondhand smoking, right? It's just, circumstantial hearsay information. So what is the way forward, and what are we supposed to do is there needs to be an open dialogue between government and the users, consumers. And there are forums, and there are many, like Bloomberg also comes into India. Obviously, he's not going to let it lie down because it is the biggest population for smoking. So that's where the dilemma is right now. And the initiative by the health authorities, even though they were very good, they did a fantastic job in COVID. Managing 1.6 billion, 1.4 billion people is not easy, right? They did very good jobs in COVID. Maybe they should apply the same initiative for harm reduction in tobacco, all forms of tobacco. I shared yesterday also with Jeff that the harm is more as you go into the interior of India, because that's where people do not have access to any healthcare. You go into the interiors, people are they're farmers, they're people working, day laborers, they're eating tobacco the whole day. There is no harm. This is a country which has 90% incidence rate of oral cancers because of chewing tobacco. A product like snus would have fit so wonderfully in the healthcare total harm reduction policy in this country. Because as we know, the data from snus and the other kinds of chewable tobacco, which is there from the Western countries, suggests that it is practically as good as zero. I mean, I'm quoting from one of their own publications. You're having 90% people coming to you with oral cancers, and if you speak to any oral surgeon, you speak to an ENT surgeon. I'm a cardiologist, so I look at the heart, right? But you have to lose half your face if you do a surgery. They put these pictures on every box of tobacco. I think more than that, they should keep these pictures on their table and make decisions which allow these people to have that benefit. And I think that's the reason why I'm so passionate about THR in India, because maybe a small drop can make a huge difference. And that is what we really want, a drop and a step in the right direction. I'm not telling them to change policy. 2019, they just came up with some agenda. They said, we're going to ban all of this. It was a blanket ban. No research, no sale, no possession, nothing at all. Just blanket ban based on the EWALI. That's it. No discussions, no talking to us about it. So, that's where we are right now.
And there was an award from the World Health
Yes.
Organization for banning vaping. And does that I would call it pernicious influence, Is that influencing your
I
politics?
think last year they sold about 1 billion cigarettes. 100 billion cigarettes. Sold in the country. Cigarettes are taxed at 56%. Government makes a lot of money with cigarettes, right? But 80% of the cigarettes which are sold in India are belonging to a company called ITC, Indian Tobacco Company. But the government has a 30% stake in that, right? And the rest is by Godfrey Phillips and the LIC, right? So each political party tries to appease their local population so they get elected, which is a good thing, but at what expense? Right, so maybe that's something where a national thinking about THR. I'm not telling you make a decision tomorrow. Sit across the table. We talk about THR. We'll put our facts. You bring your facts. Let's have a consensus on that.
You've mentioned Swedish snus, which I love, but you've also mentioned tobacco growing. And there seems to be a bit of a disconnect with the World Health Organization. And we've seen already a Brazilian member of Congress being not allowed to enter COP because he happens to represent people that grow tobacco. But are the World Health Organization ignoring the fact that people in low and middle income countries first and foremost need jobs and economic growth and security? And is there some solution where both harm reduction could be achieved, but also jobs and growth could be maintained?
We saw what WHO did in COVID, and at least thank God we didn't listen to them, right? The first statement by the WHO was, COVID is not a major problem. They tweeted that, and then millions of people all over the world died because of that. They were trying to, do something to make sure that even though Taiwan did a wonderful job in curtailing COVID, but they did not congratulate Taiwan because they didn't want to make some other country, upset. You know whom I'm talking about, right? But that's how they are. And then all of a sudden they'll backtrack, and then they'll try to protect this one. And I don't see the transparency, so I don't trust what they say. If I don't see transparency, if I don't see openness to science, I don't trust that organization. I honestly don't, because even though they make a lot of policies which impact us, which impact our patients, which impact our population, many of these policies need to really have an open-ended debate in a very, very transparent manner. If there is no transparency, there is no consistency. And that's very, very clear. And they're handling this THR very poorly. If I could give an opinion as a personal, human being, I was expecting them to be a custodian for us, right? They're supposed to take care of our health. Their policies are supposed to help me live a better life, make better choices. They're making choices which will put me in harm's way. Now, that is not something I'm expecting from an organization I have given the responsibility to take care of my health. And that is contrary to what they stand for. Even the FCTC, if you look at their policies, what they're saying right now is totally different to what they're supposed to do. So what are they supposed to do?
Absolutely. And you've raised COVID, and I always try and point out as much as possible that the answer when it came to COVID was harm reduction. The COVID vaccine was harm reduction. And so it's very frustrating that was clearly the answer to try and stop the deaths from COVID, but the subject of harm reduction is ignored elsewhere. And in actual fact, you're a doctor. Isn't all healthcare harm reduction?
Everything is. That's what I spoke yesterday also. Before you start practicing, you have to take the Hippocratic Oath. The first statement is, I will do no harm to my patient. Only after you say the Hippocratic Oath can you start practicing. So your entire medical practice is based on harm reduction. You look at the pharmaceutical industry. They're regulated in a very different way because obviously they have the money. Every new drug that comes out into the market, whether it's weight loss, whether it's diabetes, whether it's cancer, is harm reduction. If you compare drugs which were there 25 years ago and drugs which are available today, there is a huge difference between industry. And that's something which doesn't make sense. Let me give you another example of harm reduction. We have sugar-free, right? We know sugar is bad. We have sucralose, we have aspartame, we have acesulfame. That is harm reduction. Right? Now, a diabetic patient taking sugar is going to go for a toss because the sugars went up, all over the place. Everything we do is harm reduction. Everything.
Yeah, that's very important because some of the products you've mentioned that are harm reduction, they're not medicalized products, they're consumer products. And that's one thing that some doctors say, well, I can't encourage someone to vape because it's not a medicalized product. But there's lots of times when doctors actually encourage people to do things that aren't medicalized, aren't registered with in the pharmaceutical industry. My doctor tells me I should do more exercise. So there's lots of things like that. Right, Kurt, South Africa. COVID, prohibition, does it work?
Obviously. Depends on who you're talking about. If you're an illicit tobacco producer and seller, prohibition was a fantastic time. Made a killing. So yes, in South Africa, 2020, banned 5.5 months the sale of tobacco, e-cigarettes, alcohol, and even open-toed shoes. And what we saw in that particular period of time is that there was a slight dip, a slight decline in the smoking rate as per government statements. But when we wiped the sleep out of our eyes and realized that this was not going to do anything and it had no basis in science or evidence, we suddenly find ourselves in a situation where the monopoly of the tobacco industry or tobacco, the tobacco sales was the illicit trade. And a flood of products coming across the border, bringing a host of other complications with it, came into South Africa. But the illicit trade, we must be very honest here, the illicit trade wasn't the prohibition or the ban during that period, wasn't the genesis of prohibition in South Africa. Well, not prohibition, sorry, of the illicit trade in South Africa. This has been ongoing for at least a decade or more. And I'd likened it to the fact that there was this incremental increase in taxation and into an environment where there is more and more unemployment, higher inflation, less opportunities for people and so forth. And therefore, a lot of those individuals then started going into or buying their tobacco products from the illicit trade. So in 2012, if you look at some of the statistics there, the illicit trade was around about 2%. A decade later, it is now sitting between 53 and 70%. And no one quite knows what the real figure is because according to the University of Cape Town, it's 53%, and according to an Ipsos poll, it's around about 70%. And if you ask me, I think we're closer to 90%, because pretty much every smoker or person that smokes that I've engaged with buys an illicit pack of cigarettes. And it makes a lot of sense if you consider that a taxed box of 20s would cost in the region, I've actually calculated over a year in dollar terms, it would be around $2 to $2.50. However, an illicit product costs 60 cents, US cents, for a box of 20s. So in a country like South Africa, that 60 cents is very attractive. So, and that obviously now adds to the complications and the issues around harm reduction, is just that cost factor itself.
Do you think that the World Health Organization, the FCTC, were they influential in encouraging those policies?
I think, I don't know to what degree. I personally see it as lazy legislation in South Africa, because they would follow the World Health Organization much like a church, and are not in the position or don't have the ability to test those guidelines in their own environment. And that's exactly what we've seen with the current tobacco bill, is that during the process, there needs to be some kind of what they call a social impact assessment, where they then try and understand what the impact of this bill is. And if you look at the product that they presented, the document they presented, you could see that it wasn't really well done, kind of thing. So I don't know if it's because the World Health Organization actually has an influence as much as they just say, well, there is a guideline, that's the guideline we're sticking to, without actually testing it and understanding the real impact. And the reason why I would say that, to strengthen that argument, is in South Africa, we haven't implemented Article 14, which talks about the demand reduction of smoking or tobacco use in a country. We haven't implemented Article 15, which is the control of illicit products in a country. And the other thing is, it took us 17 years to do our first global adult tobacco survey. And the last time we did a global youth tobacco survey in South Africa was 2011. So I don't know if it's too much of an influence, but rather than, well, it's there, we'll tick that box and off we go kind of thing, without actually understanding the repercussions and the impact that it will have.
So South Africa is not necessarily implementing all the articles, but it's also not being encouraged by the World Health Organization to consider other paths, is it?
No, of course not. I mean, of course not. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems that we face in South Africa is exactly that, the implementation. So we'll have the laws, it'll all be in writing, it'll all be passed, but to actually implement some of those things is never seen. And if you just look at some of the other criteria or other indicators in South Africa around crime, around unemployment, around education, around all of these things, it looks fantastic on paper. It really does. I mean, all we have to do is slap nice cover on it and give it gold leaf around the pages, and it really looks fantastic. It's beautiful. But none of it has been able to implement it or be implemented. And therefore, it just becomes a free-for-all. And that's, those those actions are represented in the other indicators that we see in the country. High crime rate, unemployment, the low education levels, all of these indicators. I mean, for example, South Africa doesn't really have electricity at the moment. It's up to 8 hours a day of no electricity.
Yeah, it's rather appalling. I used to live in South Africa near Cape Town and loved it, and I describe it as the most beautiful country in the world with the ugliest politics.
Exactly.
Can I just cut in?
Sorry.
You had just mentioned before you asked her something, it was playing on my mind. I've written some data down about how doctors can be an example of whatever they do, right? I just wanted to share some data. The WHO actually did an international survey of doctors, okay? And they found out that there was a very, very high prevalence of smoking among the medical fraternity. Now, if you want the figures, at least for India and China, 30% of Indian physicians smoke or use some form of tobacco. That's a huge population, right? I'm going to show you the oxymoron here because there's another survey we did of 50, which I initiated with 15,000 physicians in 11 countries, and this is the direct opposite of exactly what's going on over here. Citizen as an example of how society should be. That's what the perception is. The reality is different, but that's the perception. So when doctors tell patients, I have more than 300 patients of mine who have shifted from cigarettes onto electronic devices, albeit they had to buy it from the gray market or underground, but they're happy now. They found a lot of difference. This survey, which was done considering 15,000 doctors, it was done in 2022, and we did it with an international online survey company. 9 out of 10 doctors, that's 90% of the doctors, have misconceptions between nicotine and smoking. 90%. That's for somebody who studied all his life. 90% also believe that nicotine is responsible for lung cancer. You have 80% who believe that nicotine is responsible for COPD, asthma, and all kinds of birth defects. And of them, 50% more than 50, I would say 56% of the doctors, of those 15,000 doctors, agreed and understood that they are not trained to handle tobacco harm reduction. They have absolutely no idea. So the easiest way for them is to say this is the bad guy.
Just on that, you've reminded me of a gentleman in the UK, Dr. Sud, and his wife, who work tirelessly to try and inform, they're British Indians, inform Indian doctors about tobacco harm reduction. And as you said earlier, this is there's a huge goal to be achieved because there's so many users of tobacco. And he was recently aggressively attacked by the Times for promoting alternative products to smoking. So much so I understand some doctors won't now meet with him. And he was holding conferences with huge numbers, hundreds of doctors. And there's no doubt that Times piece, you can see where it came from. There's quite a clear and obvious trail that can be seen. So the harm that is being caused by some PR agencies, perhaps, should we say, working for Bath University, Tobacco Tactics, funded by you-know-who, is awful and appalling. I want to talk a little bit about snus and India, but all of you can answer this. Are developed countries failing LMICs at COP? Because I watched the UK's statement, and they effectively just said, we're going to ban smoking for young generations, so that problem's going to be solved. Don't think so. And Sweden, no mention by the British about vaping, just to add that, but Sweden has been sitting on this amazing product and has almost been embarrassed about it, unwilling to tell the world, India, you've got a high oral tobacco use that's killing people. Oh, we've got this product that doesn't kill you, but they just keep quiet. So, are the developing countries guilty?
Don't you think that is obnoxious that they call noble product, snus a noble tobacco product?
Oh, it's madness. It's been around for years.
200 years.
Snooze did come to India. They were shown the back door. They were asked to leave. Yeah. They did come to India. They were very interested in setting up a manufacturing, everything
Swedish match.
in India, just so that the taxes would be low. They would say, hasta la vista.
I don't know if developed countries are failing. I think WHO is failing in the sense that they took and incorporated into FCTC policies and remedies that are not designed to work in LMIC countries. And the LMIC countries' authorities believe that by just enacting these policies in their laws, they have done their job. Like waiting for some kind of miracle that the law will change reality, even though the law is not adapting because it is inefficient. I mean, in Mexico, the selling single cigarettes has been banned since 2008. And you can go every other corner, in every other stoplight. If you want to buy a cigarette, you can buy it near your car from a vendor in this corner. And this has been happening since 2008, and oh yeah, we have banned the sale of single cigarettes. And that happens with almost every policy enacted in the Mexican tobacco control law, which follows, of course, the policies implemented in the FCTC. So they have failed, yes, because they do not understand that these countries need or have several different needs. And that's why I find vaping so fantastic. If you see that in 2016, this is an old survey, but it said that the Mexicans that tried to quit smoking in that survey, and that they reported that at least they tried, only 3.5% of these people used some way of drug or pharma solution for smoking, and only 3.3% of the people tried to use some counseling. So if Mexican smokers are not willing to adopt these solutions, they should not be forced, or the authorities should not expect that they will change their behavior. What they should do is put in front of them products, consumer products that work and that can help us quit smoking, and additionally, this will not cost a penny, or a peso to the Mexican government. I mean, it is the smokers taking care of themselves by acquiring the products that save their lives.
Well, they don't like people acting themselves to improve their health. They want to dictate it. But yeah, so we've got implementation clearly in South Africa and Mexico as a strong theme. I just get the impression the World Health Organization is in its ivory tower and can't consider or understand the fact the implementation itself could be difficult. And the implementation and difficulty reminds me of what happened 2 days ago when Ukraine spoke, which I loved. It was an amazing speech where they said, sorry, we can't actually do anything to implement the FCTC because we've got a war on. There's this awful country, Russia, coming and raping our children and women and murdering us. And they were basically cut off by the World Health Organization chair because they don't care about the difficulties you may have implementing it. They only care about one single subject. So I think it says it all. What role do NGOs have in your countries? And I just want to give you a bit of a tidbit on that. Someone that's definitely not my wife is a trustee of a charity that normally has nothing to do with smoking, but this person told me they had a program on, so I was shown the material, and who was funding it? Some Bloomberg Philanthropies. And I looked at what the aims effectively were, and there were two aims. The first aim was to tell people in these LMICs not to smoke. If only we'd thought of that before. The second aim was effectively to try and increase stigma around smoking, telling school children how awful smokers were. So, very frustrating. It's not a policy that works, and you only need to go back to the 1980s and observe the HIV epidemic and see how stigma was not only immoral, but it didn't actually work. And it was only when harm reduction was implemented did we see serious reductions in HIV. So what's going on with NGOs? Are there any NGOs coming to your countries that are promoting harm reduction, or they're all promoting prohibition and bullying?
Abstinence.
Mark, I just want to get back to that first question around, are the developing world, or is the developing world failing the LMRCs with regards to this? I think the developing world are failing themselves by representing the good that they have done in these fields. They're failing themselves and they're failing their constituents and the good policies they put in place. I mean, particularly look at the UK, New Zealand, and so forth. But I also blame the developing, or the LMRC countries for actually not doing their job, by not looking at the evidence, by basically just accepting and consuming whatever the World Health Organization is doing or what they're saying. I mean, how many of these representatives in these governments have gone to, for example, an E6 summit, or gone to a GFN, or had a round table, an open table to say, listen, guys, let's have a discussion, let's talk about it. They immediately throw the Article 5.3 up on the door and then slam it. So that they're not, those LMRCs are failing their population, their countries. And I think it's very difficult, or I think it's unfair to expect that the developing world constantly tries to hand out and try to guide the LMRCs through this process. They also need to come halfway and do the right thing for their individuals. With regards to NGOs, I spoke about lazy legislation. And yes, Bloomberg provides the people as well as the tray and the document that sits on the tray, and that then gets handed over to these governments and say, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's a justification of what we should be doing. Again, not investigating the consequences or what the real impact of having those things in there. So yes, the NGOs are definitely active particularly in South Africa, and I know a lot of parts of Africa too.
And you know what? And there is actually on the FCTC, on I believe Article 16, paragraph 64, it says that the parties should ask or demand, or they're encouraged to ask it is the experience of the countries that are lower in their prevalences. So we do have then we need accountability from the parties and the delegates that are right now, at the COP, because they need to ask what's going on with the other countries. For example, what had happened if Sweden didn't share the success what could be the success of the seatbelt, right? What happened if Canada and the UK didn't share before what was the success of the needle exchange program, right? What had happened if we have not started talking about sexual health and for sex workers as well, right? So it is everybody's fault. It is the fault of the people and the countries that are actually making huge advancement of public health by embracing harm reduction in a lot of areas, not only in tobacco, but it's also the fault of our countries in LMICs for not asking the right questions and actually have the encouragement to start debating and the dialogue with these countries that actually making a sense and making an advance in public health by lowering down their prevalences of smoking, because we have seen the huge success from Sweden, 5.6% prevalence. We have now been reported that the New Zealand is currently at 6.8, right? The UK making huge advances. So what is the people that we have there that they don't have no desire to ask them, hey, why you're doing so good on this? What are you doing differently? And after $1 billion that we have spent on the COP and the FCTC, why don't we try a $30 one that is just a vape at a vape shop?
Something that's really interesting that's happening in the next 1 year, at least I feel that it is. Like I mentioned about the misconceptions, I feel that a very good start would be getting doctors to start understanding more about THR. Right, that's something which we really need to work on, and there's a very good initiative which is just happening. I think we'll have the first meeting sometime in March, and is the initiation of a global THR academy, where every year we'll probably have 30 to 40 nominations, and it will be a 16-month course. There will be 4 modules. We will train people for THR. So every year there'll be about 30 to 40 people trained for THR who will be going out and start doing whatever they need to do, especially with doctors.
Actually, I also believe that there is some kind of disassociation between the population level and reality and the education and the way of thinking of health authorities. I mean, I guess they were training the Johns Hopkins Public Health School because they really use a narrative that is not working in Mexico. If you go to the street and you explain someone what is an e-cigarette, they're going to say, oh yes, it's logical. And if they see the president making these bans, they say, banning. I mean, it is not a popular solution, and people is not accepting it. But the thing is that I mean, tobacco and e-cigarettes is not one of the most important problems in Mexico. We have a lot of other relevant problems. But the thing is they just think that they can ban and things are, by some kind of miracle, e-cigarettes are going to disappear. They don't care because I guess they just want to report their success, because when the COP started on Monday, the Mexican delegate tweeted or posted in X that oh, we have several achievements to report. I said, which ones? Where are the achievements? You have banned life-saving alternatives. You haven't managed to reduce the smoking rates in Mexico. You don't have quitting programs. Oh, we have a phone line and you can call, but people don't want to go to therapy. So this disassociation between reality, between what is happening in real life and what they are enacting in laws and their provisions and their policies being implemented, I mean, unless there is a shift in the way of thinking of health authorities, unless they start questioning WHO mandates, because that's where they are. It's like they are dictating what should be done in Mexico, unless they see other examples, as Jeffrey was saying. I mean, what's going on with New Zealand. I mean, they can look at Philippines, that they have a proper regulation. They can look to Chile, that has already incorporated e-cigarettes in their law. Unless that happens, if they keep following the suggestions of WHO and they keep listening to the NGOs, anti-tobacco NGOs, which are also anti-vaping NGOs,
Anti-harm reduction.
this is not going to work.
Absolutely. It now comes me to a round up. So thanks very much for all your time. I think there's some really strong themes there. I think we've shown that prohibition doesn't work.
Mark, I just want to go back to the very first statement saying that FCTC had come back and said that they had great success since they started. But if you look at their very own data, and in 2008, the very first document they released, they indicated there's 1.1 billion people in the globe that smoke. And there was only 5.4 million per annum dying from smoking. 20 years on, from 2003, we now have 1.25 billion people that smoke, and we have 8 million people that died. I fail to see the progress. They might look at it from a percentage point of view because of what's happened with population growth, but I don't see that as a success at all. I see that as an absolute failure. And therefore, the entire credibility of this process is questionable.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic final point. Madness is doing the same thing continuously, expecting different results. So let's hope we're not here in 20 years' time giving the same figures.
I hope so, I will be.
I will be too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
ready? You ready? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. You all ready? Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're on to our second session of the day, second panel of the day, and we're going to be talking about an issue many of us talk about all the time: anti-harm reduction groups' influence on global health policies. And there's a subtitle of that: How has billionaire Michael Bloomberg shaped debates surrounding tobacco harm reduction? Now, you can't really talk about harm reduction or this area without Michael Bloomberg's name coming into it somewhere. Just to give you a background, the Global Alliance for Tobacco Control, which is doing bulletins every day, I just looked through the couple of bulletins that have come out the last two that they've published, and you go through and it's a struggle to try and find some organisation that isn't funded by Bloomberg there. As I said in the opening session, they had a whole load of young people protesting outside the building yesterday from the Global Youth Voices, they're called. The Global Youth Voices is the organisation, and they are funded by the Global Centre for Good Governance in Tobacco Control. And it won't surprise you to know that the Global Centre for Good Governance in Tobacco Control is funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. But also noted in these documents is Vital Strategies, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, the Truth Initiative, the International Union Against TB and Lung Disease, otherwise known just the Union, Bloomberg funded, and of course University of Bath, University of Bath, and Exposed Tobacco Tactics, all funded by Michael Bloomberg. Now this obviously puts a big shadow over these conferences because it's almost like Bloomberg has bought the WHO. So we're going to talk to some great panel here. We've got Roberto Sisman from Mexico, Philip Tokic from Croatia, Will Godfrey from the USA, and Jeannie Cameron from the UK to talk about this phenomena and how these highly funded groups are shaping this debate and maybe obscuring the truth when it comes to tobacco harm reduction. So I think we'll start with you, Roberto, because the last panel was about low and middle income countries, and Mexico is one of those countries in Latin and South America where we know that Bloomberg is heavily funding organizations to fight against harm reduction. Do you want to tell us your view from Mexico and maybe broadly across Latin and South America how Bloomberg has an influence in those countries?
Yeah, Latin America is one of the favorite scenarios of Bloomberg Philanthropies. It's and their presence is known. Look, at least in Mexico, Bloomberg Philanthropies has also put a lot of interest and lobbying with respect to food, not only sugar, not only tobacco, because it's also part of the situation in Mexico and other Latin American countries where more people die from diabetes and obesity than from smoking, right? Latin American countries, like are only heavily smoking Argentina, Chile, and Cuba. The other countries have lower prevalences in comparison with Asia and even the Middle East and Europe. So they have been active also in this respect. And it is important to notice that the way Bloomberg Philanthropies and others, not only Bloomberg, act in the Latin American political context is very different from the way they act in developed countries or even in Asia. What happens in Latin American countries, there is a very weak law enforcement, and none of the countries, well, maybe some countries like Costa Rica and Uruguay and Chile are are closer to what in the West you identify as a democracy, which is that the power, the legislative power and judicial power have influence. in the rest of the countries, it's a very imperfect democracy with a very low-level political class, and there is a lot of marginal population. So Bloomberg Philanthropies acts in this environment, and they know that they can get a law enacted, the laws that they want enacted, just by lobbying the right people. They don't have to lobby all the masses. They don't have to convert the masses. They just have to convert a few high-ranking officials. And in the case of Mexico, we have had in Mexico a very centralizing government, centralized in the person of the president. And the president, as in all authoritarian structures, he has officials that are close to him are given complete control over their sectors. And this is what happened with the health sector in Mexico. The president gave absolute control on the health sector in Mexico. It's a large sector of the government, to one official who is strongly connected with Bloomberg Philanthropies, an epidemiologist who did his PhD in Johns Hopkins. And then this guy was given free hand over all the health sector, and he convinced the president to just follow the instructions of the union, to ban it. Now, the legislative process was more complicated, and they were not able to produce this ban through legislation, even that they coerced it. So what the president did, he enacted 5 decrees, 5 presidential decrees banning it, right? Now, this president will never go backwards, will never regret what he did, and so regulation is blocked because this president will not remove any of his decrees. And this situation is reproduced more or less in other countries. But the key point that I'm saying is that Bloomberg Philanthropies is operating in a system with very low accountability and scrutiny, and their lobbying is directly with high-ranking officials, but this is what happens at the top of the pyramid, the law. But what happens in reality in the street? We have black markets. And this is the situation. Now, again, with this I finish. I don't think that what Bloomberg is doing, let's say it's legitimate. He's putting money into a cause that he believes it's justified. The problem is that he's not subjected to any accountability, and it is affecting the democratization of these societies. And second, it is a massive conflict of interest. It would be an enormous advance in transparency if all these groups that are funded by Mr. Bloomberg, directly, indirectly, that they declare this as a conflict of interest. They don't declare that. And it is important, I think that as a first step, this has to be declared. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's interesting. That's fine. We're sharing these. It's interesting you say that. You mentioned Bloomberg is heavily in your country, and the one thing that most people here, we've come from all over the world for this conference, and yet all of us have heard of Michael Bloomberg. All of us know that he's influencing in every one of our countries. We even suspect that he's now in the UK, or his money's in the UK, which may explain why the UK government's gone a bit awry recently. Philip, Croatia and the EU. Do you get a sense that Bloomberg is operating, or Bloomberg's money is operating in your country and in general in the EU across the European Union?
Well, I can speak about Croatia. I couldn't speak about the rest of the countries since there is 26 other countries in the European Union. But I think Bloomberg is not directly in Croatia like it's in the United States, running NGOs, financing and everything. For NGOs we have another American-Hungarian billionaire that likes to run the NGOs and make the politics, and he doesn't. He's not upset about vaping. But regarding the Bloomberg, everything that happens to the United States also injects to the other countries. So we know about the Evali case when it was, so their propaganda, when it started to the States, there weren't a single case in the European Union or in Croatia. But the media propaganda was running several months. Somebody founded that. The media doesn't talk every day for several months about one subject, and if it's not founded very well. So we can see the traces of someone that is making, mass media hysteria and everything, and make a platform so that this product would turn out bad.
As well as funding, AstroTurf groups like the Global Youth Voices, which obviously is funded entirely by Bloomberg, and funding lobby groups that we know about, Tobacco Free Kids, Truth Initiative, all these. Bloomberg money also funds media outlets, and I'm going to talk to you here, Will. We know of a few of the Examination is the most recent, which is entirely funded by Bloomberg money. The Investigative Desk, which is, I think, based in the Netherlands, is funded by them. And the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, these are very long words, very tongue twisters, but they're all funded by Michael Bloomberg. And they say, oh, but that funding doesn't affect anything we write. No, we just write things that we believe in. And yet all of it is aggressively anti-harm reduction. So what are your thoughts? You run a media outlet. How is the difference between what they say and of course we're being accused all the time of being funded by tobacco industry and marginalised, and yet they seem to be exempt and everything they say is pure as the driven snow. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I think a lot of us in this field at this point have had experienced fairly sort of hostile questioning from Bloomberg-funded media outlets. Look, I don't want to be a hypocrite about this because my non-profit that runs my publication has received donations from tobacco and vape companies, among other entities. We've disclosed that from day one, and we continue to disclose it at various points. And so it's not funding per se that I have a problem with. Every organization gets funding from somewhere. Of course, I happen to think that Bloomberg funding is, as Roberto and so many others have demonstrated, is being used to promote really harmful and wrong ideas and policies. I think that the issue with Bloomberg funding of some entities, including media, is how transparent is it? Yes, they say they get Bloomberg funding, you can find that information, but is it disclosed as a competing interest in the same way that that industry funding would be, for example? Because when the funding is coming from a man and an organization who are ideologically opposed to what evidence shows is the best practice to reduce smoking-related deaths, I think that somehow to portray Bloomberg funding as squeaky clean in comparison to the nefarious industry, I think there's a double standard there, and that's a problem among many others.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the other thing I find about this, I'm just going to throw it out while I remember it, is my sister kind of half understands what I do, advocating for harm reduction, and she knows I vape, and it's all around that. But I mentioned to her about Bloomberg and the funding, and sometimes I see a flicker in her face as if this sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory here, But it's not. We all know it's happening, but you try and talk to people, and they think that can't possibly be real because it is so corrupt to them. They think, no, this must be something, a conspiracy. So I generally don't tend to use that as one of my primary arguments, even though it's a seriously and fundamental problem that we have with harm reduction. But this is the problem I have. When I've mentioned that to her, afterwards, she then would say to me she notices articles where the name Bloomberg pops up, and she says she notices there's always an agenda towards it, you know. And so now she's seeing it herself, even though she doesn't know much about what I do. So I think it's one of those things, once you do see it, then you can't stop seeing it. And the reason you can't stop seeing it is because it's everywhere. It's everywhere in this debate. You can't go read 5 minutes into anything without finding something which you think that's funded by Bloomberg. So, Jeannie, you're an expert on COP meetings. Consumers recently were discussing in consumer forums how in COP7 there seemed to be a much more open understanding of harm reduction in India than there is now, and even a positive decision on e-cigarettes. Do you think Bloomberg funding has corrupted WHO in that short space of time? Or do you think they were always a bit like it? I don't know. What do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you have to go back a lot further than recent times. And having been someone who's been to all the intergovernmental negotiating bodies that created the FCTC and most of the COPs since, I think we have to go to a higher level. And one of the things that I always think of is whoever pays the piper calls the tune. So we're all blaming the WHO, but is there somebody behind what the WHO is doing? And if you look at the global NRT market in terms of funding, or Fortune says that the global NRT market is worth $3 billion in 2021 and is expected to get to $4 billion by 2028. If you add in the vaping and other products such as heated tobacco, etc., that gets up to $59 billion. So you can see the difference there. Now, the pharmaceutical industry is very clearly behind it. And I think to look at that, you have to go back to the World Conference on Tobacco or Health, which is an event which has occurred since the 60s. Every 3 years, they have a meeting and they have a resolution of what they're going to do. And if you map out and go through what they want to do, you can see where things are and where these alliances come from. So, for an example, in 1994 at the Paris World Conference on Tobacco or Health, they said their resolution was, let's go to the WHO and ask them to do a treaty. And then 5 years later, that is in fact what has happened. So if you look at the year 2000 World Conference on Tobacco or Health, what they set out to do was to create an alliance between the World Health Organization, the pharmaceutical industry, the World Bank and international NGOs. And the purpose was to stigmatise tobacco, tobacco smokers, etc. And I think we can see from that strong alliance. Now, if you go even further than that, you look at, in a sense, what better way to ensure a market for NRT and cessation drugs that the pharmaceutical industry makes by sponsoring those that would carry out the tobacco control activity. So I used to follow WHO funding, and I went to the 2003 in Helsinki World Conference on Tobacco Health. And at that particular conference, I took photographs with my camera, which showed Glaxo, Novartis, and Pfizer were in a big way. In fact, a big, huge billboard on the wall used the Marlboro Man imagery, where it used to be "Welcome to Marlboro Country," and changed it to "Welcome to Nicorette Country." So back in those days, it was very clear. Now, an independent journalist called Michael Day wrote an article in the BMJ in 2006 talking about the funding of the WHO from pharmaceutical industries. And right up until 2006, the funding on tobacco control specific activity was able to be mapped. But then some things started to have to change. And he actually said that he looked at the guidelines on WHO funding, and they are, the WHO guidelines interactions with commercial enterprises, meaning there's not allowed to be any direct funding, but it says that you have to offer caution where there is a non-direct interest. So when we're talking about industry interference, everybody sort of has aligned it with the tobacco industry, when in fact, my very strong view is it's the pharmaceutical industry that is showing undue influence here. So to get to Bloomberg, which was how he comes in, you have to link Bloomberg with the pharmaceutical industry. And that's very clearly done if you look at the back at the results and things like that. And Bloomberg, whilst he is known mostly for being a financial, putting Bloomberg desks on everybody's, or the analysts' desks, he also runs another thing which is specifically related to pharmaceutical industry, and he sells that for all of the bio and everything like that. You can go right into that, but you can see very clearly the very strong link. Now, FCTC Article 14D actually gives the pharmaceutical industry legitimate right for the FCTC to ensure that governments, in addressing tobacco control, it says that they must, in order to attract tobacco dependence, must enable pharmaceutical products, cessation products, etc. So it's all very closely intermingled in there. And I think we shouldn't really forget that. So Bloomberg gave in 2005, at the start of the FCTC, when it first entered into force, a grant of $500,000 US. The Gates Foundation put in $250,000, and the first grants were started to be given in 2007. So it's a lot of those grants I used to follow where they were. A lot of them were in India. We were talking about that before. But a lot of that is now closed. You can't really see it. But I think that the pharmaceutical industry is really there. Bloomberg is very linked, and that very strong agreement that was set in 2000 to bring all these areas together is where we shouldn't forget about that, because it's very strongly entrenched in everything that is there. Yeah, I'll stop for now. But just one thing I do remember from the World Conference on Tobacco Health in 2003. They were giving out all these lollipops, which was big tobacco sucks and things like that. And this was all from the pharmaceutical things. I think I got, in those days, it was a CD-ROM, and it had, when you look in it, Glaxo's CD-ROM was on it was 200 slides, PowerPoint slides, which I still have, which showed how to do tobacco control activity against the tobacco industry, against smokers, against everything like that. You shouldn't underestimate the pharmaceutical industry here in this area, and anyone who doesn't realise that they're behind what is going on is cutting in a lot lower and blaming the WHO, because it gets its funding from the pharmaceutical industry.
That's incredibly interesting. Thanks very much. And I'm glad you got lots more notes, because, yeah, I'd love to hear more of that.
Just
I could
in
listen
case
to that.
I don't forget something, which I've already forgotten.
This just came to me while you were speaking. Remember I mentioned this AstroTurf group, Global Youth Voices, which has turned up and protested this week at the convention centre. Well, they put a little advert in the bulletin yesterday, or the Day 2 bulletin. He said, "Are you attending the WHO FCTC COP10? Do you wonder what young people have to say and what advocacy role they play in tobacco control? Envision the next 20 years of FCTC with the International Pharmaceutical Students Federation and the International Youth Health Organization." So instantly, you've got it there. And apparently these Global Youth Voices are meeting up with the said International Pharmaceutical Students Federation today. So there's the link once again.
At the 2003 World Conference in Helsinki, youth, that's where they brought youth into it. And that's over 20 years ago. And they said youth has to be involved in order to propel these issues going forward. And they had a big, at that particular event. And these events, they're not small. In my first experience of that one in 2003, there were over 2,000 delegates with satellite navigation between all the various different events going on. The one in Washington in 2006 I also went to, and that had 4,000 people there, all from NGOs, youth, everyone together, and all funded, because you would see Glaxo, Novartis, Pfizer, everything going around the room. This was all pre-vapes and before the e-cigarette industry, really, the vaping industry came along. So they were already onto it and have only got worse because the vaping industry and the tobacco industry that's got into these other products that aren't NETs are cutting into that, that 4 billion size of that industry. So it's very clear. It's just a matter of mapping it all out.
Yeah, yeah, but funny enough, they're always saying about sinister forces trying to stop what they're doing. Well, sounds all very sinister to me.
Well, there is a group of, it's called the Dolder Group, and if anyone can find any information about the Dolder Group, it's a meeting, a secret meeting of the CEOs of the Big 10 pharmaceutical industry. And I first learned about them in the context of the FCTC protocol development. Now, that group came together to try and do some things in that event, but they definitely planned strategically around this issue.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of secret things. I mean, the Global Tobacco Regulators Forum, that's pretty secret as well, and it selects which parties of the convention it's going to bring along. And I think I mentioned the other day that I've seen UK parliamentary questions from elected MPs asking what went on in these meetings, and they're just told we can only confirm that the UK went to the meeting, and that's it. It's just it's omerta kind of thing. Nothing will leave the room, which is all very strange in this sort of thing. And let's talk about that with governments, Will, because you know what happened in the Philippines a couple of years ago was quite dramatic. The Philippines was on exactly on WHO's path. They were banning these products, and then all of a sudden, almost overnight, they changed and they said we're not going to ban these products. We're going to regulate them. And the statement they gave to the COP9 online thing, which is on YouTube, was almost angry that they were saying we're not going to do this. You know, why would we do that? They were saying, and of course, I think Bloomberg groups were caught trying to influence the government, actually writing policy for the government, which was against the constitution of the country, and they reacted very badly to that. And you know, Bloomberg is like persona non grata in the Philippines. They also went the other way. You would catalogue that on filter, I presume, but it's not just the only government. It seems to be they're trying to infiltrate governments, not just Philippines, but all around the world, especially in Africa. You know, you've written about, or your filter article's been about this. Do you want to comment on that side of things, trying to buy government influence?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just very broadly say we have published people from a range of different countries in the global south reporting similar experiences about government influence that Bloomberg organizations are having and about the impacts on policies there. And I'll just say that, you know, among all the impacts that Bloomberg funding is having, for me, the very worst of all is the interruption of smoking cessation efforts in countries in the global south with high smoking rates and where relatively lower amounts of money will buy relatively more influence. I do think it's sickening, frankly, that so many people in these countries are being deprived of their best chance to quit cigarettes, and to see Bloomberg-affiliated groups actually celebrating the bans that accomplish this yeah, I mean, you feel the same way about it as I do.
I've seen recently, for example, there's a lot of heavy action from Bloomberg-funded groups at the moment in Kenya and in Pakistan over nicotine pouches. Now, these seem to me very good markets for nicotine pouches because they're low cost and they can get, you know, in places where there's heavy smoking rates. And yet they seem to be trying to damage the, you know, that potential market in Pakistan and Kenya and trying to get the government to kick those products out and prohibit them, which, again, like you said, it seems so anti-public health. And you think, well, this is ideological and it's damaging. So you wanted to say something, Jeannie?
Yeah, just to say, well, you look at countries like what's happening in the UK and the focus on banning vapes and flavours coming under scrutiny in most parts of the world and probably even the UK. Or you look once again at the pharmaceutical products on sale in the UK, allowed to be sold to 12-year-olds in flavours like cool fruit and all these other things, just because they're made by a different industry. and not one word of scrutiny from anybody about those particular issues. But I think what I wanted to say was about the treaty.
Sorry, can I just add, that's without parental permission as well. There's been a few stories where kids have overdosed on nicotine gum in school, and they were given it because they'd been caught by a teacher smoking, and the teacher's allowed to give them nicotine from the age of 12 without even referring to their parents.
Yeah, because it's made by the pharmaceutical industry. So I think one of the things, if you go back to what is a treaty is a contract between governments. And the purpose of most treaties that we know of, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, etc., they're all about governments or state-to-state agreements. The FCTC does something different. It ventures into domestic policy in a way that other treaties don't. The environment, it's all about what is this country's damage going to be on that country, and that sort of negotiation, and what governments have to do to bring down the emissions and all the other things they're doing. But on this one, it's completely going into countries and forcing political action against what's been designated at the international level, which is just not how a treaty should be. But one person who did write very significantly and strongly about this was a man called Greg Jacob, who was on the US government's delegation to create the FCTC. And he wrote at the end of it a paper for the Chicago, and published it in the Chicago Law Journal in 2004 called Without Reservation. And in that, he was very scathing of the process. And he says something like, I wrote it down here because I met him, but he said in his publication, the object of a treaty negotiation is the making of law, and that is not something public health ministers are particularly well equipped to do. And he said that during that whole process, it was like being in the Geneva twilight zone, because nothing was occurring the way that it should be. But because nobody's watching and doesn't really care about tobacco, these things just become customary, and then they become customary international law, what the WHO is getting away with now. And he said that, governments are captured by some of the international NGOs that are participating there. In many of the ones I attended, you would often see, like Saudi Arabia or another country would have no delegate there, or they were out shopping or something, and one of the NGOs would just step in and talk for that country. And these things were occurring all the time. Now, he wrote about all of that, and then 10 years later, in 2014, he wrote another article called something marking I can't remember the title of it, but it was all about Article 5.3 and how this treaty has just gone far too far. And yet, that those words are not listened to. And then Meyer and Shelley, who were from Yale, they wrote an article about tobacco harm reduction this was years ago when it was first done, 20 years ago, saying that, harm reduction is the fourth pillar of the FCTC, and spelling out all the legal reasons why it was and is, and, this diversion away from that, and also why are consumers excluded. I mean, the whole thing is because those that seek to put it into the pharmaceutical area, it's not a consumer product as far as, it's treating tobacco dependence, and the poor victims who are addicted have to, have a medicinal pathway to be able to in order to address that situation. And that's why consumers aren't welcome. And but I think we have to go back to the actual treaty itself and use the actual treaty words in there that give harm reduction an equal place with demand reduction and supply reduction, and really, fight on that, and fight that this new area that has emerged has an equal footing, as well as NRT, which isn't under the spotlight at all.
Yeah. And I think someone's mentioned it so far, the Ottawa Charter. I think it was Konstantinos mentioned it. Ottawa Charter 1986 which says that consumers should be involved in all discussions because they should be given all access to things that can give them the best chance of having a healthy life. And yet that's a WHO declaration from 1986, and they've overridden that, and it's almost like it never existed. I just want to ask Roberta. We know that people have tried to get hold of Michael Bloomberg because they think surely somewhere deep inside he must have a conscience, and if we could just get through to him and advise him, look, do you realise what damage you're doing with this? You might be able to influence him to change his mind. But I mean, Clive Bates has written letters with like 100 signatories. They've tried, sort of all sorts of briefing papers and everything, and nothing seems to get through. Now, do you think he just doesn't even see these articles? Or, I mean, if you directly send a letter to him, is someone intercepting it? Because he doesn't even reply, or no one even replies on his behalf. Is there any way of getting into that ivory tower somewhere to debate with him?
Let's look what happened when the authors, the 15 ex-presidents of the... they wanted to have a dialogue with him and his minions. Wanted to have a dialogue, and it was declined. But look at what has... I mean, Bloomberg is not God, okay? He's a very wealthy man. I'm not demonizing him. He's a very wealthy man. He's a product of the American rat race environment, corporative environment, right? Now, we saw how he tried to become the candidate for the Democratic presidency in the Democrat candidate in 2020. At that time, he was facing not Clive Bates, not you, not me, not anybody, not the 15 ex-presidents, but he was facing top Democratic politicians like Senator Elizabeth Warren, and they were able to confront him face to face. And in fact, Bloomberg was forced to withdraw his candidacy. They, for example, anyway, the details do not matter. What I'm trying to say is that it is politics. Like Bloomberg is playing in the top league of politics. He has tried to be a politician and has failed recently because he was the mayor of New York, and his record is mixed. He did good things, bad things, etc. But he's playing in the top level of politics and finance. So people of this mentality are not going to be moved. For them to make a U-turn, it's too much. They're like a transatlantic. A transatlantic making a U-turn is going to be a slow process. And so it is the only way that Bloomberg can be forced to be accountable and to be more sensible about the policies that he's implementing is political. There has to be a major political change. We cannot foresee what would happen. Maybe if Trump wins the elections in the US, there will be a major change, but it could be a change for the worse. We don't know. But what I'm trying to say is that it's at this level. It's like if the World Cup on soccer, what can minor players of soccer or players that are not well known, what can they do? It's another league. So now it is very interesting what Jeannie mentioned in the sense that we're not facing, Bloomberg is not the initiator of the storm, and he's not even directing the storm. It is a perfect storm where many factors are intervening. For example, the pharmaceutics, they're not sending kids to protest, or they are not hiring NGOs that will be doing lobbying in the country, the lobbying that Bloomberg does. They do other type of lobbying that is more quiet and is more pervasive, is not visible. But we are seeing a perfect storm. All the forces that are opposing harm reduction in tobacco because they are not opposing harm reduction in other substances, only in nicotine. It is a perfect storm. It involves a global technocracy that is very well funded and that has good reputation globally. And this global technocracy is being disturbed by a technology that they do not understand, they did not create, and it is forcing them to change the paradigm of, of, uh, of taking care of smoking. And this factor, and then other factor, the pharmaceutic interests, because that's part of a medical paradigm. For example, it's not only the pharmaceutic, it's also their medical customers. If I'm a medical doctor, I'm used to deal with transmissible diseases. So he has malaria, and suddenly he tells me, look, if I consume this thing, I will still have malaria, but a very benign form of malaria. A doctor will say, no, no way, you have to get rid of malaria. And this works with transmissible diseases, right? Either you have the virus or you don't have it. You cannot have a small little 1,000th of a virus. But non-transmissible disease, what is called non-transmissible, involve lifestyles and involve 1 million factors, cannot be conceived as a transmissible disease. And the pharmaceutics and the medics, they work with this medical paradigm. That's why they reject this consumer product, which in their view will keep you with a little bit of malaria or a little bit of a virus. There is a misunderstanding of the effect. And this is another part of this perfect storm. And then what I mentioned about Latin America and Mexico, local politicians want to have an agenda that will be well-financed, and there is no democratic balance in these societies, and so they hire. It's a perfect storm. Bloomberg is just maybe the most visible object, but it's not the only one.
So you're kind of saying they're used to black and white issues, black and white, quit or die. In this case, you know, you either quit with us or you die. There's no halfway house.
That's a medical paradigm that is applicable to a virus or a bacteria, but it's not applicable to what is called. I dislike the term, these non-transmissible diseases. No, these involve lifestyles and involve genetics and involve 1 million factors. It's not yes or no. You have the virus, you don't have it. Yeah. But they still have this idea. It is a part of the medical, it's a medical problem, a medical mentality.
So, Philip, you said that you don't think Bloomberg has much cut into your country, but you've got another philanthropist and he's okay with vaping. Do you see your government being influenced by the WHO or anything else, or are they just thinking we're going to make our decisions for ourselves? Do you think they are hearing this outside influence and it's affecting how your country treats the products?
Well, I think my country doesn't know what to do with that product, and always look abroad. What have others do? So, and when they pick a country, it's usually a country that have a restricted policy towards vaping. So it will never be like, let's look for the UK or something. At the first time, I remember 2014 when we had our first conference, the health representative have said in some countries in the world it's banned, the vaping products, and she mentioned Bangladesh or something. You know, it's so far away. You know, what do we have to do with Bangladesh? So generally, they don't have any clear attitude what to do. Maybe the best case about that is the pouches in Croatia. So they forget to make it in the law, to regulate it, and now it's not regulated. And the kids take it. They said they put several of the pouches, and when they are drinking, it's much better for them. You know? And they still After 2 years, they still can't regulate it. You know, it's slow, and we are always waiting for something. What will others do? And you know, so I don't know. I think they always refer to World Health Organization. World Health Organization said, give us those guidelines, we have to obey. But you know, once at our conference, the health representative said that they saw in 2019 the huge decline in the youth smoking, huge decline, and they were surprised. What happened? We didn't do nothing, since we never do nothing about that. We just monitor, and then they find out that kids start vaping. It wasn't the best for for them, you know, to know that. You know, they weren't happy about that. But I said, okay, but this is the harm reduction. You know, the kids will find their way, and the people will find their way. Let's give them everything we have from the safer nicotine products, and people eventually will find out. You know, some are sooner, some are later.
It's benign malaria.
Yes, yes.
It's interesting. It's a very good point you make there about how countries will look to other countries for examples of regulatory regimes. And they always tend to, like you say, go for one that's banning something or restricting something. They never look and say, look on, well, let's see if we can find a country that's doing well without having to ban or regulate something. But I suppose that's what the anti-harm reduction groups play on. They play on, just, if we can just knock a couple of countries over, then we can point to other countries. Look what they've done. You should probably do the same, which I think is why I'm so disappointed with what the UK's done recently at the moment, to be honest.
But if you look back to what's bringing all these things together, as I said, that alliance which was agreed in 2000. And then what Greg Jacob also said was that whilst the WHO and health ministries are not very good at treaty making or making law, they're very good and expert at crafting public affairs campaigns. So if you have the WHO with the international NGOs and the funding by Bloomberg, and you have all these things together, you then get a very clear, very strategic public affairs campaign, which I think one day will become a very model for students who learn that sort of thing. Because you can see clearly what happened in the UK, what happened in America, going for the youth side and the environment. They published the WHO Euro region, Let's Go for Youth and Environment. And then we saw, Martin, at the beginning of last year and all the way through last year, almost every single time you'd open the newspaper or you'd see an article, and it would show that youth issues or environmental issues when it came to disposable vapes, constant. And that's what is an example of a very good public affairs campaign. And look, we've got to COP. They wanted to do that. They said they were going to do it in advance of COP10, and they have done it in advance of COP10. Very well orchestrated.
Yeah, it was almost from the 1st of January 2023, wasn't it? You just saw it. There was one day, I think it was about March, where the Daily Mail in the UK came out with 3 anti-vaping articles in one day. And it's been non-stop, incessant. And
because they knew the UK was advancing down that area.
Yeah.
And that's why, look at their statement in the forum.
Yeah, and the government
Monday,
led by
useless.
Yeah, and the government led by the incompetent Rishi Sunak has fallen for it. And yeah, exactly, done exactly what the other side wanted.
It cannot last 1,000 years.
No,
Even,
it can't.
The most perfect public affairs campaign. We see it. It's part of American politics. American politics is full of this type of public affairs committees. For example, I'm very aware of the Cuban one, yeah, because part of my family is from Cuba. Okay, now the Cuban American Foundation had veto power over everything that had to do with Cuba, right? And they were imitating the Israel Public Affairs Committee, which has veto power. Let me say, a veto power of everything that had to do with Israel and the Middle East, etc. But these lobbies also decay. For example, in the Cuban American Foundation, the founder of this foundation, Mas Canosa, passed away. And he represented an old elite group of Cubans, and the younger Cuban Americans were not so, and so the power of this power, and the same thing in the case of Israel, because Netanyahu, sorry to bring up these issues of politics, Netanyahu managed to transform a bipartisan support for Israeli policies into a Republican issue. And this generated a lot of tension with the Democrats. And the same with the gun lobby. All these lobbies are powerful, but they are not eternal. They can decay. And in the case of harm reduction, what keeps me afloat, because we know we're facing this machinery, it's a very, very efficient machinery. What keeps me afloat, and I think many of us as well, is the fact that no matter what the newspapers publish or the British Prime Minister or this and that person's, all these things that are happening on the top of the pyramid, on the bottom of the pyramid, consumption goes on. Even in the UK, you think that people will stop using disposables? No. Consumption goes on and on and on and on. And this is a sort of global experiment showing that the products are not really causing harm and are being enjoyed by lots of people.
Yes.
And it's increasing. And sooner or later, this will also have an impact on these lobbies, on these public affair activities.
Yeah, I think that's a very positive way to end. It won't last 1,000 years, and it might decay. But let's hope it decays quicker than 1,000
We
years.
will die soon.
Yeah. But like you say, and I think it leads on to, I'm going to have the final say here, it leads on to, yeah, you're right, people still use the products, but the reason people use the products is they're consumers. The consumers are the most important voice, so we should carry on. Politics is a long game. We're in politics, so just carry on doing the same messages, and then the consumer voice is, like you said, a public affairs campaign on its own right, so just keep on pumping out the same messages. So, listen, thanks very much. That's a great panel. I've really enjoyed it. For everyone watching, we're going to break for lunch here, but we come back again at 1 o'clock with a science session. We have Konstantinos Vassilinos, Ricardo Pelosa, and Dr. Rohan from India to talk about debunking the myths surrounding tobacco and tobacco harm reduction. So do join us at 1 o'clock for that. So thanks very much to our panel, and we'll see you later.